In the current landscape of international trade relations, the United States once again finds itself at the epicenter of growing commercial tension with China, this time with particularly profound implications for the global automotive sector. On February 4, 2025, the Trump administration initiated a renewed trade offensive, implementing a 10% tariff on virtually all Chinese imports to the United States. This measure did not go unanswered, provoking immediate retaliation from Beijing, which imposed 15% tariffs on various American products, including agricultural machinery and large engine automobiles. The escalation continued on February 27, 2025, when Trump announced an additional 10% tariff on Chinese goods, scheduled to take effect on March 4, 2025, bringing the total tariff to 20%. This contemporary trade conflict echoes Trump's previous administration, which imposed 25% tariffs on Chinese parts in 2018, leading many automakers to reshape their supply chains by bringing previously outsourced components back to the U.S. The Biden administration largely maintained these tariffs, demonstrating the bipartisan nature of increasingly protectionist American trade policy toward China. Now, with Trump's return to power, the protectionist trajectory not only continues, but intensifies. The current tariff increase occurs within a broader context of aggressive trade policies. Trump has also threatened 25% tariffs on imports from Canada and Mexico, though these have been temporarily suspended until March 4th, following negotiations with leaders of both countries. Further complicating the automotive industry's outlook, Trump declared on February 14th his intention to impose approximately 25% tariffs on automobile imports beginning April 2, 2025, following a review period concluding April 1st. The automotive industry is particularly vulnerable to these escalating tariffs due to its complex globalized supply networks. The Detroit Three, Ford, General Motors, and Stellantis maintain multifaceted relationships with China, purchasing components for U.S.-assembled vehicles, manufacturing vehicles in China for the American market, and exporting American-made vehicles to China. This interconnectedness means the impact of tariffs ripples throughout their operations, creating a cascade of economic and operational consequences. Many essential vehicle components originate in China, including brake pads, calipers, water pumps, and increasingly important electronic components and semiconductors. The initial 10% tariff already affects these parts, and the additional 10% will further increase costs. Auto repair and parts businesses have expressed concern about the implications for their operations and customers. At Nice Guys Auto and Transmission. In Norfolk, a representative noted the importance of their services. People depend on us to get their kids to school, to get themselves to work, highlighting the downstream effects of parts shortages or price increases on everyday Americans. The interconnection extends beyond Chinese manufacturing. According to industry data, Mexico and Canada were the second and fifth largest countries of origin for new vehicles sold in the U.S. in 2024, with 11 automakers currently producing vehicles in these countries for American consumption. Together with Chinese imports, these three countries accounted for approximately 18% of total new vehicle sales in the U.S. in 2024. Automotive goods represent 26% of the value moved from Mexico to the U.S. and 12% from Canada, underscoring the North American automotive sector's regional integration that now faces disruption. The cumulative effect of these tariffs will likely manifest in higher prices throughout the automotive sector. Tom Maioli, a car dealership owner in New Jersey, estimated that tariffs could increase vehicle prices by 5% to 15%. These price increases would compound what are already near record high vehicle prices, potentially placing new cars beyond the financial reach of many American consumers at a time when affordability is already a growing concern. The impact extends beyond new vehicle purchases to aftermarket parts and repairs. G. Adoni, who works in the auto parts industry, explained the pricing dynamics. Price-wise, made in China usually means cheaper. Either buy an American-made muffler, which is going to cost a little more money, or you get a Chinese muffler and save a couple of dollars. He noted that with tariffs, higher costs for Chinese-made products would ultimately be passed on to customers, directly affecting the end consumer, who needs to maintain their vehicle in usable condition. When automobile production and supply are constrained, market dynamics typically drive up prices across the board. If tariffs restrict imported vehicles and parts, economics of supply and demand suggest that prices would rise even for domestically produced vehicles and parts, potentially extending to the used car market as well. This mirrors what occurred during the semiconductor shortage following the pandemic, when limited chip supply constrained vehicle production and drove up prices industry-wide, creating an affordability crisis that affected millions of Americans. According to the Tax Foundation, the imposed 10% tariffs on China would reduce long-run GDP by 0.1%, while the proposed tariffs on Canada and Mexico could reduce it by 0.3%. The potential 25% tariffs on motor vehicles and parts might reduce GDP by an additional 0.1%, all before accounting for foreign retaliation, which could amplify these negative effects on the American economy. From a revenue perspective, the Tax Foundation estimates the 10% tariffs on China would increase federal revenue by $241 billion from 2025 through 2034 on a conventional basis, while ending de minimis treatment and subjecting Chinese imports to existing and new tariffs would raise an additional $55 billion. However, these revenue projections would decline when accounting for economic contraction, resulting from the tariffs and potential retaliatory measures from trading partners, creating a complex scenario where short-term fiscal gains may be negated by negative long-term economic effects. China has already demonstrated its willingness to respond. Following the announcement of the initial 10% tariffs, Beijing implemented retaliatory measures targeting American exports. After Trump's February 27th announcement of the additional 10% tariff, China's Ministry of Commerce issued a stronger-toned statement, vowing to implement all required counteractions to safeguard its legitimate rights and interests if the U.S. proceeds. Neil Thomas, a Chinese politics expert, suggested Beijing might increase tariffs on selected U.S. imports, add more American companies to its unreliable entity list, and potentially tighten export restrictions on essential minerals, further intensifying the trade war. The automotive industry has voiced concern about the tariffs, particularly those affecting North American trade. The American Automotive Policy Council, representing Ford, General Motors, and Stellantis, released a statement supporting Trump's efforts to address global trade issues but emphasized that vehicles and auto parts that meet the USMCA requirements should not be subject to additional tariffs. This position reflects the industry's significant investment in North American production infrastructure under the USMCA framework, which replaced NAFTA and was implemented during Trump's first term. When announcing the automotive tariffs, Trump suggested they would be implemented gradually, purportedly giving automakers time to relocate operations to America. However, industry analysts note that vehicle production cannot be relocated quickly, even with existing capacity. As Cars.com analyst David Green warned, if the administration moves forward with a 25% tariff on all auto imports, car shoppers should get ready for some sticker shock at dealerships, signaling that the immediate impact would fall on consumers long before any production adjustments could be implemented. The industry has some experience adapting to Trump-era tariffs. After the 25% tariff on Chinese parts in 2018, automakers reshored many previously outsourced components. However, the breadth and depth of the current and proposed tariffs present a more complex challenge, especially given the looming tariffs on Canada and Mexico that could disrupt the highly integrated North American automotive manufacturing ecosystem, developed over decades under different trade regimes. These changes do not occur in a vacuum. They reflect a growing global trend of economic protectionism and industrial nationalism. In Europe, governments are implementing their own measures to protect domestic industries, while in Asia, countries like Japan and South Korea are closely watching American policies, concerned about the potential impact on their own automotive exports to the American market. This global dynamic creates an environment of uncertainty for manufacturers, suppliers, and consumers worldwide. For American consumers, the impact will be felt not only in higher prices for new vehicles, but also in maintenance and repair costs. In a period of persistent inflation and ongoing economic concerns, increased automotive costs may represent a significant challenge for families who depend on their vehicles for daily transportation. For many Americans in areas with limited public transportation, owning a reliable vehicle is not a luxury, but a necessity, making the impact of these tariff policies a matter of economic access to basic necessities. As the April 2nd deadline for automotive tariffs approaches and the additional Chinese tariffs take effect in March, industry stakeholders will be watching closely for further policy developments and potential modifications. The outcomes of ongoing negotiations with Canada and Mexico will also significantly influence the North American automotive landscape. What remains clear is that Trump's tariff policies are reshaping global automotive trade patterns, with lasting implications for manufacturers, suppliers, dealers, and ultimately, American consumers, in an economic transformation whose repercussions will be felt far beyond the automotive sector, affecting communities, jobs, and the structure of global trade for years to come.